You're also involved with, you founded Science from Scientists, which I think is one of the coolest things because it takes like scientists and it's like it shows high school students and middle school students, this is what a scientist is like, this is what we do, and it kind of exposes them early. Um, and I wanted to ask, so you run a nonprofit, which is Science from Scientists, and you run a for-profit, which is Ixcela. What are some of the challenges in both of them? And then what are some of, how have both of those organizations been?
I'm really fortunate. I have great teams at both companies. That is the only way to succeed. I mean, frankly, even at just one, I believe in the importance of building a great team. And so, at SciSci, so Science from Scientists' nickname is SciSci. Um, Thankfully, a lot of the day-to-day operations, there's a exec team and they're able to do a lot of the day-to-day. I still
Mhm.
help with some of the high-level fundraising and with some of the bigger partnerships. So our work with Disney, for example, I'm a part of that. But I'm trying, just because there's only so many hours in the day, to figure out how to balance both companies. What's really interesting is they're different, but they're not. Um,
Mhm.
Science from Scientists is a nonprofit, and yet it's a business. It's when we hear people talk about nonprofits, and they think, well, it's all about charity, and it is to a certain extent. But in order to grow the business, we have to think really strategically about how to scale, about how to grow things. There's only so much money that the development team can run out and raise every year. And they're very talented, but we think about recurring revenue sources. We think about fee for service programming. We think about, how do we charge for a program here and then use some of those proceeds to help pay for some of the programs where the kids are poor and can't afford the program. But you have to think that way because someone has to pay for it. It's unfortunately that's just the economics of running a business, and we pay our staff, of course, they're not volunteers. So, it's thinking strategically about how to scale and grow the business in a way that allows us to serve as many. Really, I mean, we're very much focused on underprivileged kids, but to some extent we also sell programs, at full price in order to private schools in order to help offset that cost.
Mhm.
We, I run the nonprofit like a business, like a real company, not just as a um, charity, because there's only so much money you can raise that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that. And I think that's a similarity. The Ixcela is a for-profit, and of
Mhm.
course, there's no donor, there's an investor. And those
Yeah,
investors have an expectation to get a return on their investment.
yeah.
They don't just donate money to you. Which is, to some extent, people donate at SciSci. Their return on their investment are the metrics of the company. Did you show you actually educated kids? So we have, a lot of metrics that we put forth showing the program works. That's what they expect. But at Ixcela, it's different, right? They expect us to find clients, sell product, etc. So they're different, but they're similar, if that makes
Mhm.
um, on the sort of team and management side, they're very, very similar. I think the hardest part of my job, and it's always been this way, I'm a very non-traditional CEO. My Myers-Briggs profile is like the opposite of what your traditional CEOs Myers-Briggs is, and um, I'm just different, and so for me, all of the leadership things, dealing with a lot of the interpersonal, I had to learn all of that. Nobody taught me
Mhm.
deal with management related issues and leadership issues, and it's really hard. Most people aren't like you. So in the early days, I would be like, I don't understand. Why is this happening? Why can't this person just blah? And I was constantly reminded by my mentors and even my husband, like, remember, everybody's not you. And they bring to the table their own sets of
Mhm.
strengths. But you got to pull yourself out of it
Mhm.
and figure out how to inspire in a different way. And that's hard.
Mhm.
People do all kinds of weird stuff that you'll be like scratching your head, like, what just happened and why? What?
Yeah.
And you have a tendency, because you care a lot, to take everything very personally. And people come and go in your life, and it's kind of a lonely position. So I'd say that is very similar on both sides. Just inspiring the team, getting the job done, and helping them to be the best that they can be.
Mhm.
Which often I spend time just sort of as listening as a counselor. I listen to people's troubles and try to help them, you know, make good decisions and it's like, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? And someone's having a hard time, like, but it's hard. That's the kind of stuff that is draining. Like,
Mhm.
imagine, doing that all day. So I think that it's interesting because in both companies, you're raising money. It's
Yeah.
a different structure, but you still have to raise money. That's
Mhm.
hard. But they're similar but different. In both companies, you have to learn how to be a leader and a manager and be firm but fair. It's hard to do that. And especially when half the time you don't necessarily know the right answer.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't always know. It's like, well, do you think this is the right answer? It's like, sure, yep, let's do it. But it reminds me, there's this great scene. I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan. There's this great scene in one of the Star Trek The Next Generation episodes where Jean-Luc Picard and Beverly Crusher are like stranded on this planet together, and
Mhm.
they've been connected via like a device where they can hear each other's thoughts.
Yeah.
And she says to him, like, which way should we go? And he
Mhm.
goes, that way, like with a 1,000% conviction. And she stops. So they start walking, and then she stops and she says, "You don't really know if that's the right way to go." And he's like, "No." And she goes, "Wait, but you just said that with 100%, like, you knew." And he was like, "Well, you don't know, and I don't know. I mean, someone has to decide."
Yeah.
So, and she's like, "Well, how many times have you actually done this
Yeah.
in our lives together?" And so it's really tough, but you have to you figure out how to lead, and it's just years of, and I'm still learning, and with every year that goes by, it's like you realize how much you don't know, more
Mhm.
than anything else. But again, I don't know how helpful that is, but I think it's
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like a trial and error because I think everyone's different. And one thing you work at it might not work out, you fail, you try, but from the failure, you learn these things didn't work. So let's not do this again and try it a different way. And that's, I think, in both in science as well as in companies, those two things are similar.
yeah, it's interesting. The word failure has always been failure suggests like a total disaster. So I'm always very careful not to use that. I think you want to have, you can fail, but you better have a safety net. For example, if you're a startup and you run out of money, you're screwed. I mean, it is, in fact, that is a failure and there's no way back from it. So even if you're,
Mhm.
well, but I know what to do now. So I'm careful to use that word. But I think it's almost like a measured, you can be careful in what you do. I tell people, try it, and we've at that point we've calculated the risk. If the risk is so real that it threatens the company, the team, people's jobs, we have to be very careful about taking that risk. But if it's it's a risk that does not potentially endanger the entire organization, then sure, go for it. And if to
Mhm.
some extent, then we don't care. But I like to tell people this idea that you learn from failure. Failure is scary when it's really failure. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think you have to set yourself up to allow yourself and the team to have room to try things. And then there's no blame. I don't like blame. I don't blame people. It's just stupid. It's a waste of time. Um, and if it doesn't work, okay, then we learned. But as long as the ramifications, aren't well, as a result of that, we need to lay off half the team, or, we have to close down the company, or, so again, it's measured risk so that ahead of time, if we do this, if it totally bombs out, okay, these are the ramifications. Are we all good with that? Are we willing to take that chance? Yes, good, okay. If not, let's make a different plan. And
Mhm.
otherwise, I think also people are afraid to just like try stuff if they really haven't thought through what are the ramifications
Yeah.
of that decision. So, again, the word failure scares me, because failure suggests like engine failure. Oh, that's really bad. So,
Yeah.
you don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those were all the questions that I had. Thank you so much, Dr. Engel, for taking the time and doing this podcast.
You bet. Absolutely. Hopefully it was useful and helpful, and yeah, thank you for having me.